Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald. Good evening, everybody. Well, last night on the show, as you know, MPs were voting, and we got the result at 9 o'clock last night. I predicted on air it was going to be 200 for Mrs May and 100 on the other side. I was doing round numbers, and it was 200 Mrs May and 117 of those who voted saying they had no confidence in her as leader. It was quite a big number. The turnout, remarkably, was 100%. Every single Tory MP actually took part and voted in that last night. That meant she'd won. That meant there can be no further challenge to her in theory for at least another year. But 37% of those who voted no confidence. It was a number that was just a little bit higher than perhaps I or many other people thought it would be. So what I want to debate tonight with you is whether, as a result of that, she is now stronger or weaker. And a very important part of answering that question is what is happening here today in Brussels, because Mrs May arrived to meet the other 27 prime ministers and presidents of Europe because she needs to get some concessions on her withdrawal agreement. She told Parliament the other day she was seeking assurances and reassurances. And this is all about the famous backstop. It's all about whether, at a point in the future, the United Kingdom could withdraw from these arrangements without the permission of the European Union. And of course, the Attorney General last week in Parliament told us that we couldn't do this unilaterally. We couldn't do it on our own. So she's coming here seeking something so she can say to MPs we would be able to leave if we chose. These were her comments on getting out of the limousine earlier on this afternoon.
My focus now is on ensuring that I can get those assurances that we need to get this deal over the line, because I genuinely believe it's in the best interests of both sides, the UK and the EU, to get the deal over the line, to agree a deal. But I recognise the strength of concern in the House of Commons, and that's what I will be putting to colleagues today. I don't expect an immediate breakthrough, but what I do hope is that we can start to work as quickly as possible on the assurances that are necessary.
She doesn't expect an immediate breakthrough. Doesn't sound that upbeat to me. Well, I've been in the council today, and still within the hall is LBC's political editor, Theo Usherwood. Theo, hello.
Good evening, Nigel.
That was hardly the most optimistic of statements at the beginning of this council meeting, was it?
Expectation management, Nigel. Theresa May is very unlikely, from what we're hearing on the ground here at the European Council, to get anything that will change the mind of either the DUP or members of her own party. She left early for this summit in Brussels in order to hold a face-to-face meeting with the Irish Taoiseach Leo Varadkar. That meeting was meant to take place yesterday but was cancelled so that she could cope with problems on the domestic front. But then Mr Varadkar came out just before the summit started and said they're not going to even open the issue of the Irish backstop. At the very, very best, Theresa May is either going to get an addendum to the withdrawal agreement or a new couple of sentences within the political declaration saying something along the lines of the backstop doesn't suit the European Union. There's a commitment to bring it to an end once the transition period is over and it finds itself being implemented. But that isn't going to be enough for Theresa May to secure the votes of the DUP or
No, it isn't.
And there's a feeling here in Brussels that, if you like, the tinkering, the salami slicing with the words has got to come to an end. And actually, the appeals from Leo Varadkar, I spoke to Guy Verhofstadt, who of course runs the Liberal party within the European Parliament, that actually Mrs May needs to find a different solution, which could involve involving Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell and the Labour Party, which could involve simply reverting to a customs union rather than trying to take Britain out of the customs union, which could involve a second referendum. Interestingly, the Prime Minister ruled out twice today going back to the people. It really does feel like
she's trapped, Theo, isn't she?
She's trapped. She's being boxed in.
Yeah, absolutely.
She is being boxed in by the other European leaders. She has nowhere to go. And you're asking the question of your listeners, Is Theresa May's position strengthened? I would say her position is more entrenched. She isn't going anywhere, while back at home Dominic Raab, Ian Duncan Smith say that they want to get rid of her and that she should resign following last night's vote. So she's more entrenched, but she's not actually in power because the fundamental arithmetic of last night of the House of Commons hasn't changed. And so we just find ourselves hour after hour, day after day, just heading towards this meaningful vote, but with no solution.
Crisis, what crisis, eh? Theo, any updates in the next hour, please come back to us. Thank you. That was Theo Usherwood. And Theo and I had a long chat this afternoon, and I think she really is absolutely now stuck in a cul-de-sac. She can't find the way out. She's been boxed in there very cleverly by Monsieur Barnier, who, whilst he's not on our side, I have to say to me, to see not just this 37% figure, but the way in which the 37% have behaved today. Here was the former Brexit Secretary, Dominic Raab, earlier on this morning.
Did you back her in the vote last night, Mr.
I'm
Raab?
afraid I didn't, because after pulling the meaningful vote and with the scale that we now see of opposition to the deal, I don't think her position had been tenable. We'll have to make the best of it, but I think that my biggest fear now is that if she continues in place, we have a greater risk of a Jeremy Corbyn government. So very much in sorrow, not in anger, I'm afraid I didn't vote for her last night.
What happens next?
Good question.
Should your MPs try and back her as best you can?
We will have to back her as best we can, but the problem is that both in relation to Brexit and the wider sustainability of the government, given the likelihood of any changes to the deal, and given the likely scale of opposition, it looks very difficult to see how this Prime Minister can lead us forward.
Very difficult to see how this Prime Minister can lead us forward. There it was from Dominic Raab, the former Brexit Secretary. What a refreshing change that makes. I'm sick to death of Boris Johnson saying, the deal's dreadful, it's awful, but I support the Prime Minister. Because it's just not true, is it? And why they all play that game, I don't know. So some honesty there from Dominic Raab, pretty similar from Ian Duncan Smith, and one or two other backbench MPs today being pretty openly mutinous. And I think one of the lessons of this is that if the losing side in a contest simply don't accept the result, then things are far from over. She may, in theory, be back there for another year. Folks, my view is that she is much weaker after last night's vote, and she'll be even weaker still after tonight's European Council than she was before yesterday. That is what I think. John in Wales thinks Mrs May will get nothing from the EU. She is now weaker than ever before. Well, John, I agree with you, but those that disagree, please call me 0345 6060 973. Let's see what Hayley from Edinburgh, a new caller to the show, makes of it all. Good evening, Hayley.
All right, Nige, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. The thing is, Hayley, that I'm a Brit, you see, and being a Brit at a European summit now means people come up and laugh at you and say, well, of course, you're not really leaving, are you? And I find it difficult to be polite in response.
Now, I think Theresa May is indeed the weakest link, as Anne Robinson would say right now, after the vote last night, especially a third of her party going against her. I think that says a lot for the Tory party.
And yet, Hayley, as we speak now, she's still there. She's still got this dreadful, and I think the worst deal in history, withdrawal agreement. She still intends to try and get it through. Hang on. So she says that as a girl, the naughtiest thing she ever did was run through a farmer's field, and as an adult, her worst indulgence is she sometimes has a 2 teaspoons of peanut butter.
Oh my gosh!
I mean, I don't see any great scandals coming, Hayley. Do you?
No, not really. There is a porn star with the same name as her in America, and there was some confusion about this, I think, about a year ago. I remember that on the press.
It's all about whether there's an H or not, isn't there? Yeah. Hayley, I'm sorry, there's not going to be a scandal. It's not going to work. Thank you for the call. Martin from Horsham is a new caller. Martin, is she stronger or weaker today?
I don't think she's one way or the other. I think she's obviously a dead politician walking, but I think the real question is, what we're going to get out. Will we get no deal or not? If I can just say to start with, I was a Remainer in the general election. I'm not now. Well, if I had the chance to vote again, I think I would still vote Remain. But I understand the Brexit argument now. If I can make 3 quick points, you may cut me off, you may not. Number one, thank you for being the most influential politician of the last 20 years. I think that just goes without doubt. Without you, we would not be having this discussion. Number two, democracy is going to hold. We are going to leave the EU. And whether or not I disagree with that is neither here nor there. It's vital democracy holds.
That's interesting.
And number three, I think, thanks to you, the electorate will become more informed. It will realise that listening just to a sample of media or a sample of politicians isn't good enough. And let's see that the electorate will learn that voting matters. And then when the economy crashes and we lose jobs, at least we'll have an electorate which is more informed. So thank you very much for that, because we didn't have that 20 years ago.
Well, I'm optimistic, Martin, of course, and I believe strongly that actually us being in control of our own financial services industry, fishing industry, etc., we can do a damn sight better job than this mob in Brussels can. But, who knows economically what the future holds? Nobody can ever predict accurately. Thank you for your kind words. I have certainly provoked a bit of debate in this country, but what we need, Martin, is some settlement here, isn't it? And you're optimistic that we will leave the European Union. Do you think if the final option becomes May's deal or no deal, do you think Parliament would allow the legislation that exists today saying we should leave on those terms? Would they allow it to happen?
I think they'll only allow no deal now, which will exacerbate the issues that we have. But again, it will make those issues clearer for everyone.
Interesting perspective. Not sure I agree with you.
No, not at all.
I mean, I hope you're right. Isn't it odd? We come from different positions. I hope you're right and I'm wrong. I just fear that somehow they will stop no deal from happening. But we will just have to see. Martin, thank you very much indeed. On Twitter, May's only hope is to try and run the clock down for a hard Brexit, to scare the EU into getting what she wants. Unfortunately, I don't think she will. Oscar, she couldn't scare the EU with anything. They're not scared of her. They openly laugh at her. They think the whole thing is a joke. In fact, the world has now made the United Kingdom believe that we are not much better than a laughingstock and very badly led. Biddy from Glasgow says, May is a good woman, but she played a strong hand weak against EU negotiators. We're watching an embarrassing era of UK history. Billy, we are genuinely watching a very embarrassing era, and goodness me, it's quite embarrassing being a Brit in Brussels tonight. I mean, I know I'm Nigel Farage and that makes it harder, but it really is quite difficult. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 6:15 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. So the Prime Minister won. She got 63% of the Conservative members of Parliament to express confidence in her leadership, but 37% expressed no confidence, a figure slightly higher than I dared to think. Now, normally, after a contest in a political party, the losing side says, OK, hands up, we accept it, the other side have won. One of the reasons tonight, folks, that I actually think she's in a weaker position than she was this time yesterday is it would appear that some of those on the losing side simply don't accept the result and are going to keep the battle going. In fact, the whole thing was blown apart on ITV's Good Morning Britain this morning by the MP for South Dorset, Richard Drax. This is what he said.
Out of my colleagues, about 150 are on the payroll. So if you look at it like that, 117 voted to have no confidence. If we look at the statistics like that, it's pretty alarming. And I would suggest that were the Prime Minister thinking carefully this morning that she would offer her resignation and allow someone who can deliver this to take over. I don't see how she can carry on and deliver what the British people, and that's what we're here for, we're meant to be here for, to get out of the EU, to deliver that referendum result. That is our duty and responsibility, and I just don't see how she can do that.
Well, it couldn't be clearer, could it? Well, joining me on the line is Richard Drax, the MP for South Dorset, the mutinous MP for South Dorset. Richard, you took part in that vote last night and the other side got 63%. Aren't you just being a bad loser?
No, Nigel, no. Well, I've been called an extremist too by the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Welcome to that club, yes.
daring to honour the referendum result. No, I think the point I was trying to make, and again, this is not personal against the Prime Minister, but she has tried to achieve the aim of leaving the EU, which is what the people of this country voted to do, and quite clearly she has failed. Now, she said, when we fired a big warning shot across her bow last night, that she'd listened to us. Well, I think if she'd listened to us, she would have dumped the whole deal and started again. because she's now, as you say, over with you in Brussels,
Yep.
and getting virtually nothing except assurances, and that simply will not do.
Okay, so for you, this is about the issue, not about her as a human being.
No, I've got nothing against the Prime Minister personally, and nor has anybody else. This is about fighting, as I see it, for our country, to deliver what the people of this country voted to do, and to honour that. And it sickens me, actually, makes me furious that we gave this vote to the people of this country, and we, the politicians, have the gall, or many of us, to try and stop it. I just find the whole thing inconceivable, and trust in politics is going to suffer, is suffering, and that's what this is about, Nigel. It's about trust. And the people of this country, many of them, including myself, are losing trust rapidly. And that is very serious.
I certainly get plenty of callers into LBC saying that, Richard. But Richard, under the rules of the game, she won that contest last night. She's there, in theory, for a further 12 months. If you believe she's the wrong person and is not going to deliver us the right Brexit, what is the method now for getting rid of her?
Well, I think the problem is she's going to get rid of herself, because at the moment she's driving the car straight into a wall. I mean, she's withdrawn one vote. She plans to bring it back next month, and as far as we know, she's going to have nothing to add to it, and that will be voted down. Now, I don't see how, after a third of the party has voted in no confidence in the Prime Minister, and if the vote is again voted down in January, how on earth can anyone stay on, because there's nowhere else to go?
OK, well, we'll see. And Richard, finally, can I ask you, do you now, honestly, hand on heart, believe, given the way Parliament is, given the way much of your own cabinet is, do you genuinely believe that we will be leaving the European Union at 11 p.m. on March the 29th, 2019?
Well, I believe with every ounce of my being, that's what I want, and I know millions do. I think there's a very good chance of that happening, Nigel. I am slightly worried that the Prime Minister could do something, and only she can stop it, of course. But this really is, I think, such a vital moment in our history. And if she stops that, because, of course, WTO terms is the alternative, and that has been demonized when most countries around the world trade on that perfectly peacefully and effectively. If we fall back on that, that's what I would hope will happen if we can't strike a deal. We leave and then renegotiate from outside, where the rancor and division will have then gone because we would have left. OK, Richard Drax, thank you very much indeed. Well, that was Richard Drax, pretty mutinous, and you heard the comments earlier from Dominic Raab. They clearly, the 37%, are not accepting her leadership, all the while it is tied to this deal, this withdrawal agreement. Chris says he'd be in favour of another referendum if no deal was on the ballot paper. Why are they so afraid of offering no deal as an option? Well, Chris, Vince Cable was saying that the way out of it all was to have a referendum on Mrs May's deal or remain. And I mean, I do like Vince, but I felt like grabbing hold of him when I heard him say that, because that would not give genuine Brexiteers anything to vote for at all. Interestingly, Chris, Tony Blair was kind of suggesting Remain or WTO if there was a second referendum. We haven't reached that point yet, but the Prime Minister's options do appear to me to be narrowing in a quite extraordinary way. Frank from Wisbeach in Cambridgeshire is our next caller, and a new one to this show. Welcome, Frank.
Oh, hello, Nigel. Great to speak to you.
Good to speak to you.
I thought of a possible, I only say possible, solution to the backstop business.
Right.
It's true, actually, that Northern Ireland voted to stay in the European Union.
Yes.
And also, a lot of their people have applied for Republic of Ireland passports, I think. And I thought, well, why not give the Northern Irish a referendum to reunify with the Republic? That would solve the border and would keep Northern Ireland in the European Union.
Well, what if the Northern Irish in that referendum voted to stay part of the United Kingdom, Frank? You wouldn't have solved anything then.
If they voted to do that, well, then it's a no-no, isn't it? But I thought it hasn't been tried, so it's a possibility.
Well, it's a possibility, Frank, but I think faced with the prospect of joining the Republic and joining the Euro, which is hugely unpopular from what I can make out in Northern Ireland, I think they'd vote to stay part of the UK. Yeah. Frank, let me ask you something.
Yeah, sure.
You know, would you rather see Northern Ireland leave the United Kingdom so we can get a Brexit without the backstop?
It's not my opinion. I mean, obviously, it would be left to the people of Northern. I understand the situation between the old IRA and the democratic movements and all the trouble that was caused, but in the interest of their own economic viability, surely, as they want to stay in the European Union, why not give them a chance to vote on it?
Well, yeah, I mean, you could say the same about London, Frank. Would London have a referendum on leaving the United Kingdom? I mean, I worry if you did that, where it would end. It's an interesting thought. Frank, thank you very much indeed for your call. Seb says to me on Twitter, Nigel, Theresa May won. You lost. Get over it. No, I wasn't part of it, Seb. I mean, yes, it's true. I do think she's the worst Prime Minister I've seen in my lifetime, and probably the most duplicitous one as well. What is interesting, Seb, is this. I actually did expect the Conservative Party just to say, OK, well, fair enough, we tried. It's all over. You just heard from Richard Drax and others, and they're sounding pretty mutinous, and that is pretty dangerous, I think, for the Prime Minister. Michael lives in Stannington, Northumberland, and is a new caller to the show. Michael, does she look stronger or weaker to you?
Weaker, I think.
Why do you think that?
Because everything around us falling apart, and all this play acting by politicians is not helping.
OK, but she's the leader, and she's put this deal forwards, and she's tried to sell it to the country, and she's just been endorsed by 63% of her own party. I mean, she's still there, Michael, isn't she? I mean, she does have stickability.
She's an amazing lady, actually, I think, because she's had to accept a poison chalice. She's taken on the mismanagement by our previous politicians, who incidentally didn't push the act through Parliament, so we're not legally within the EU and haven't been since. And then on top of it, she's trying to do what she can for an imperfect world, and she's trying to satisfy everybody and ending up satisfying nobody. I've read through the 500-page document.
Well done, you.
And the 30-odd pages.
Yep.
And that document is full of holes, and I question whether it's been written in the UK, because I think it's been written in Brussels.
Well, it may well have been written in French and translated, Michael, and that would be... I mean, French used to be the working language of the European Union, although increasingly I notice in the European Parliament that it's English that's being used. Michael, will she still be our leader in a year's time, as last night's vote suggested?
I doubt it very, very much.
Yeah, I doubt it too. Thank you, Michael.
And I would like to just say something else
Go on.
Before you go. All this thing at the moment, charging around the continent and all the rest, what happened to Theresa May's repeated statements that nothing is agreed to, everything's agreed? Yeah. There is a lot of smokiness about the document. It's just far from clear, and it's just not clear at all in any direction.
They dropped it all, Michael. They dropped it all, Michael. She gave away £39 billion in promise of nothing in return. I've got to run because you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, and it's now 6:30 and time for the news with Lisa. All there, Mrs May still our Prime Minister. 63% of the Conservative MPs voted confidence in her, 37% said no confidence. I'm asking, though, is she stronger or weaker? And she's certainly having a very difficult day here in Brussels. We're not expecting her to get really anything out of this meeting tonight that will be legally binding in any way at all. Now, Richard Drax MP was very rebellious, and he was on the phone with us just 15 minutes ago. And Mike from Bolton says, Richard Drax for PM. He's spoken more sense with more conviction than our PM has in 2.5 years. Drax for PM, I say. Well, Richard is a backbencher. It'd be quite a big promotion, but hey, I'm sure, Mike, he will enjoy your comments. And just spare a thought for the city of Strasbourg this week. Horrendous attack that took place in the Christmas market there on Tuesday night. The death toll is now 3. There are 12 people injured, 6 or 7 of them in very serious, perhaps even critical conditions. Obviously the city is in mourning. The flags, indeed, even here in Brussels, are at half-mast. There is a massive manhunt going on for 29-year-old Sheriff Cat. Over 700 police officers involved in this. He's still on the run. His background was that he received his first criminal conviction at the age of 13. 27 criminal convictions, some in France, some in Germany, some indeed in Switzerland, including crimes such as armed robbery. And he was radicalised in prison. And that's a story, isn't it, that we've heard before. But I think there is, after the shock and indeed the sadness at those that have been killed or wounded, a growing sense of anger about this, because he was on a list of people as a known radical, as a known serial criminal, as a dangerous person, and on that Tuesday morning, the police raided his apartment in Strasbourg, and they did it when he wasn't there. You would have thought if you're going to raid a flat, you'd make sure the person was there. He wasn't there, and it's that, I think, that has led, if you like, to him being triggered and going out and committing these appalling acts. And I think there's going to be more and more criticism of the way the French police and security services have handled this, and all that, of course, against the backdrop of 4 weekends in a row of the Yellow Jackets protests. Mrs May's got problems. Hey, I tell you what, Emmanuel Macron, the French president's got them too. His poll rating is now 18%. That is even lower than Hollande's poll rating was at this stage of the cycle, and it's the lowest ever of any French president in modern times, just this short space into his presidency. Back to Theresa May. Nigel, the backstop is easy to solve. Make it a full product-only free trade agreement. We then negotiate on financial services, fish money for access to other programmes, says Chris in Newbury. Chris, if all we tried to do was to negotiate free trade from the start, we'd be in a much better place. But Mrs May wanted us to be closely linked to the European Union. Jason in Epsom says, May's strategy is clear. She'll use the Christmas break to have a quiet conversation with soft Brexiteers across Parliament so that a single market and customs union deal is ready to roll in the new year. Checkers will be binned. The hard Brexiteer fringe will not get a look in. Jason, that is not totally impossible, and that perhaps would be something like the Norway EEA deal. That is not impossible. That is one of the options that could emerge from all of this. Difficulty being that would not be keeping faith with those that voted leave, and certainly not keeping faith with the promises made in the general election. But you know, everything's possible. Paolo says, why don't we have a backstop in favour of the UK? Meaning that the backstop could be under UK rule with a backstop against the EU. The UK would be more honourable in looking after both Northern and Southern Ireland. Paolo, we probably would be, but it ain't gonna happen. Lee in Hornchurch is a new caller. Welcome, Lee. How does the Prime Minister's position look to you this evening?
Hello, Nigel. Nice to speak to you.
Good evening.
I'm a first-time caller. I just want to say that whether her position is weaker or stronger is neither here nor there. I agree with your previous caller. She's still in power. And another thing is that when she said we may need more time, right, stuff like that happens. We don't know what that last 5... Because I remember it was actually on your show, you specifically said, and I quote, she maybe needs another 2 years to sort out the last 10%. It's like at work. 10% may be like, I'm a plumber. I'm a self-employed plumber, and it's like 10% or whatever. It might be something that's giving you grief, like you don't know. And then everyone slags her off, and she said we might need more time. And Jeremy Corbyn also said to her, "Oh, you need to step aside and let people get involved who are going to negotiate." And then after that, he actually said, if we need more time, if I get in power, then so be it. So he had a pop at Theresa May for wanting more time, but yet he's all right to have more time.
But Lee, the problem is this, Lee, right? That referendum took place on June 23rd, 2016. They've already had a huge amount of time. And the idea that the Article 50 date gets, suspended, gets pushed down the road, or even gets revoked, I mean, that would be going against what people voted for, Lee. Isn't that the problem? They haven't done their job properly.
Yeah, it's what some people voted for, not everyone. So everyone who voted to remain, I voted to remain.
Yeah.
But that's neither here nor there. Right? When everyone says, oh, we're going to leave, like we want to leave, not everyone wants to leave. But like I say, it's neither here nor there. But everyone's saying, oh, I can do better, I can do better, I can do better. Well, then go on, fill your boots, crack on, try and do better. Like, I don't particularly. It's neither in or there. I don't not like Theresa May, but I don't like her. It's neither in or there. Personally, I think this country's knackered. It's all gone to poppycock, if you ask me. It's all nonsense.
Well, at the moment, we're in a bad place. Lee, is she the best person to continue with this process, in your opinion?
Well, I don't know whether the best person, but I think she knows what she's doing. And that brings back to another point. I'd just like to say, nothing against you personally, Nigel, but you were one of the particular candidates who said she's no good for the job. No one backs her. All her candidates say that she should, they're voting no confidence, all this nonsense. Well, evidently the result last night proved that she is the candidate, because X amount of items, whatever it was.
Well, Lee, she won. Lee, she won, but I think she's weakened and the mutiny hasn't stopped. Lee, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts and your point of view. Rob from York says, Nigel, why has the Canada Plus deal never been fully explored by either side? It seems worth considering. Yes, Rob, it's what I sort of think I've wanted for 25 years. The Prime Minister never even asked for it. If we give notice that we're leaving on WTO terms, they will come running down the street after us looking for a deal like that. I'm certain of it, because that's what French and German industry would pressure their politicians to do. Robert on Facebook makes the point, and it's a good one. Corbyn's happy with the Conservative Party's civil war as he circles. Robert, interesting, isn't it, that Corbyn has not tabled a motion of no confidence before the House of Commons in the government, because as far as Corbyn's concerned, the longer this goes on, with the Tory splits looking worse and worse and worse, and actually, one or two Conservatives today beginning to say that it looks like the party may be splitting, suits Corbyn not to do too much at all. Bill in Rugby is a new caller. Good evening, Bill.
Good evening, Nigel. I hope I'm wrong, but I think she's in a strong position because, and I'm on your side all the way, I always have been, but I believe that she's had this plan right from the start. Leave it right to the last minute, and we'll end up with a second referendum, and the people are so fed up, they'll stupidly vote to stay in, and then she's won and we've lost.
Well, but Bill, she keeps telling us that it's her job, it's her duty as Prime Minister to take us out of the European Union. Are you saying you don't believe her, Bill, when she says that?
I don't. Every time she talks, she lies. She's so deluded and so arrogant that all of us just don't count. She's in her own little world, and she's never agreed with it right from the start. She wants a second referendum so that we stupidly vote to stay in, and she'll be laughing parts of her body off.
Do you know what, Bill? You're right. She's weaker in many ways than she was last night. She certainly looks very weak here tonight. And you've got this open mutiny of the Richard Draxes and others. But you make the point. Jason and Epsom made it too. She is still in power. And goodness knows, Bill, what she could do. She could possibly say, vote for my deal, or it's a second referendum. No one knows exactly what she may do. Bill, I thank you very much indeed for that call. MPs defend May, says Craig, saying she's won, and that's how democracy works. A win's a win. Yet leave one, and they want to reverse it. Hypocrites. Well, Craig, that was my point, really, wasn't it? That the reason we're still having these ongoing battles is that Remain never accepted the result, and look at where we are. And it seems to me the 37% last night are not going to stop this battle. It is, I think, as Drax pointed out earlier, less about personality. It's to do with a deal that many of them think, and I agree with them, is the worst deal in history. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 6:45 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. Well, Mrs May won her vote last night, although the 37% that voted against are getting pretty mutinous. She's here in Brussels today trying to get assurances and reassurances on the backstop. Let's go back to the EU Council meeting and speak to LBC's political editor, Theo Usherwood. Theo, what's going on?
There's two things happening, Nigel. Let's start with the European side. From what we're picking up this evening, European leaders really starting now to talk up this idea that there has to be another way, that simply there's a realisation, given what happened yesterday, given that Theresa May had to pull the meaningful vote, that actually it is not going to go through in its current form, and that whatever they give Theresa May, and they're not prepared to reopen the withdrawal agreement, it is not going to be enough to satisfy her own backbenchers and the DUP. On the other side, and this is what I think we'll start to see throughout this evening and going into tomorrow, is this idea from what the British government is saying is actually Theresa May can get something through Parliament. She can succeed. She's got a good track record of doing exactly that, and to give her a shot at doing it by offering up something that she can take back to the House of Commons. Now, of course, we're not going to get an on-the-record idea of where we are until tomorrow. Well, actually, there'll be a midnight press conference from Jean-Claude Juncker and Donald Tusk, but Theresa May speaking at a press conference around lunchtime tomorrow, and we'll get a much clearer sense of where she is. But when we met earlier in the main hall here, Nigel, you were talking, weren't you, about the idea of Mrs May's deal versus no deal, spooking the Remainers within the Conservative Party into thinking, oh my goodness, we could leave on World Trade Organisation terms, we could have shortage of medicines, we could have rocketing food prices, we could have queues up and down the M20. That's where I think this is heading. From Theresa May's point of view, of saying, listen, there's going to be a choice in Parliament for a deal or a no-deal Brexit, and the only deal that is on offer is Theresa May's deal.
Yeah, and most MPs are terrified of no deal because they believe the stories about no medicines and all the rest of it. Well, that may well be. Theo, what I do know is that to get her deal through, she's going to have to threaten something on the other side of that, there's no doubt. Theo, thanks very much indeed, and we'll await more news through tonight and tomorrow, but I think it's pretty clear she's not going to get anything substantial at all. So, is she stronger or weaker? On the one hand, she's still there. She's here today. She's in charge. She, in theory, is there for another 12 months as Tory party leader on an unchallenged basis, but the sense of mutiny is growing. What does Kane in Hackney, a new caller to the show, make of it all? Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm well and welcome.
Yeah, my first time, sorry for my excitement. I have a problem with your historic Nigel. So I'm from Turkey. I come to this country years ago to study, did my master, set up my own business based on Ankara Agreement, which is an agreement through the European Union. And no problems. I mean, I do music business. We bring people outside of European Union. We have a lot of troubles doing that. And after this breakup, we will have problems as well. But my issue is like, you keep saying that this is the greatest democratic exercise in British history.
I do.
How do you say this? Why do you think that? Based on what statistic?
On the numbers of people that voted and, for modern times, an extraordinarily high turnout.
Well, I mean, since 1992, every single year, pretty much, British people turned out much more percentages than the current percentage.
No.
And plus,
no.
Yes, they did.
No.
I mean,
No.
1992, 78%, 87, 75%, 79, 75%. These are all year by year.
61% turned out in 2001, 58% turned out in 2005.
After 1997, I do believe that what you're saying is right, but that's the era where that neoliberalism can't take over the country. And
well, Kane, look, I tell you what, Kane, either way, if we take a 25-year view, it was a big turnout of a bigger country. I stand by the fact.
25 years, then. Don't history, is it?
Well, I tell you what,
do you
Kane,
do it all the time?
more people voted in that referendum than have ever voted in any election in British history. Now, Kane, do you think the result of it? And you can ring up for an argument if you want, but I'll get you back to the point.
I have. Look, listen. I believe as a Eurosceptic, Remain was the right decision for Britain at this very time. Not all the time, but what it comes to the bottom line is like, you were an MEP for this nation for over 19, 20 years there, and you had the least, the worst record of attendance. You didn't even go to represent this country over there, and you turn around and say they don't give us right. UK has the highest number of votes in this European Union, and you were there.
Kane, there's more to life than turning up in the European Parliament and signing in for a daily allowance on the taxpayer's expense, I can promise you. And also, Kane, my job as an MEP, I've been a party leader, I've been a group leader, and if you compare my attendance and voting with leaders of other comparable political parties over that period of time, mine's pretty high. Let's move on to John in Kettering, who is a new caller. John, good evening.
Hello, Nigel. It's great to speak to you. Basically, I think she's strong. She's won the vote. This is a good step forward. But the problem is she can't get the deal through Parliament. And as Jacob Rees-Mogg said, most of the people that vote for this were on her side. They were on her payroll.
Because of the payroll,
it's a very superficial vote. But
Yeah.
I don't think she can get the deal through Parliament. That's just a fact.
Well,
That's what I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. And that was the point Richard Drax was making earlier. She'll lose, and that will be the end of her. Well, we'll simply have to see. The 117 MPs that voted against Theresa May are the only people in Parliament that have listened to the majority of the public. They aren't extremists. They are very good members of Parliament. Well, Gary, some think they're good members, some think they're treacherous, and today, many of them are becoming openly mutinous. Peter in Lancaster Gate is another new caller to the show. Welcome, Peter.
Hey, up, Nigel.
I'm all right. So what's Mrs May going to do? Is she going to stick there?
Well, she's going to revert to type. So basically what she does is she puts forward her deal, and instead of arguing for it, she makes threats by talking about what the horrible consequences of not voting for her deal will be, which I find to be very cynical.
Yes, I mean, so we've already heard hints, haven't we, that it could mean no Brexit.
Which is basically a threat. She's giving us a binary option: take my deal, or I'll make you suffer by forcing you into a situation where it's something far worse.
So she could threaten us with no Brexit, she could threaten us with a second referendum, and she could threaten us with no deal. Now, I haven't got a problem with that, but Parliament probably has, Peter, hasn't it?
Well, when she's talking to Labour, she threatens them with a no deal.
Yes.
But here's my question for you. So I can understand how Tory MPs, the 200, why they will vote for the sake of their career or for put party above the people. But don't they understand that at the next election it's going to be an existential threat for the Tory party?
Do you know, Peter, again, I'll say it again. Jacob Rees-Mogg said she can either do what Thatcher did, which is to accept that it's moving against you and to stand down, or she can do what Major did, to stay on and face electoral disaster. Peter, I cannot believe that the Conservative Party has ever been, certainly in modern times, in more problems, more trouble with its grassroots and its backbenchers than it currently is, and a house divided can't stand. So yes,
well, you need to get your boots on and get your new party started, because all my friends want to vote for you.
Would they? Well, Peter, all I've said is if we don't get Brexit on March the 29th and we contest the next European elections, I'll be there doing it. But I do think the space is being opened up, Peter. I do think there is more. I do think there is more room out there for a new party. But Peter, I tell you what, launching new political parties in Britain with a first-past-the-post system is a very, very difficult thing to do. Peter, thank you, and thanks all of you for contributing. I think every single one of you was a brand new caller of the show. So, hey, you can do it. It's 034560609.